Hi, I'm Ruth Pierce. I'm the Relationship Maximizer. I help people take all their different relationships to the next level by focusing on principles. We just started a new book on Tuesday, and we are doing, I should say, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Just a little bit of background on this book, and you may have read it, you may not have. You may have read it many times. And I am beginning to believe, well, I won't say beginning, I know that no matter how many times you read it, you will get more golden nuggets because you're at a different place in your life. So you're ready for more. So even in the stuff that we cover today, some of it may not make sense to you, but know that at some point you'll be ready for it. And you'll get your own insights as you read this book. And I encourage you to do that or do the audio. That's good for a lot of people too. This book came out early 2000s, 2003, 2004, something like that. And that was towards the beginning of my own personal growth journey. It probably started just before 2000. And so it really made a big impact on me. And many of those golden nuggets that I learned then have really impacted my personal growth. Now, as I started reading it again for this time, different things were hitting me. Yeah, those same golden nuggets were there. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's true. But different things hit me. And so they will you, depending on where you are. Now, another thing I want to say is this is all about relationship. This whole book is about relationship. And so it goes right in with my deal of being a relationship maximizer. And it has to do with all types of situations. It can be the romantic, but it also can be other family members, whether it be children, whether it be parents, whether it be siblings. It can be friends. It can be professional, coworkers, bosses. You'll see all of that in there. And one thing I do like about Stephen Covey is how he continues to bring in stories. And he uses a variety of stories. He's very vulnerable in these stories, and we get to see inside him. But he'll use professional situations. He'll talk about personal ones, family, all different ones. So let's jump in. And I'm going to start with one of the first stories in this book. He kind of introduces the whole situation with this story, I think. And that is one of their sons, for he and his wife, were having overall performance problems in several areas of his life. And he kept encouraging him, but also trying to get him to do better. And it wasn't really working. But then they realized, as they did research, that the problem wasn't with their son, but it was with how they perceived themselves in regard to their son. They had been getting a lot of social mileage out of the good things that their children had done. So it made them look good. And so once they started focusing in on them and getting the right thing, that realizing, yeah, this son is going to do what he needs to do in his time, in his own way. And we don't have to worry about it. Then over time, the son took off and did that. They realized their part was to encourage him, but to value him and not put pressure on him to perform. In essence, they gave him permission to love and value himself and let him find his own potential. Isn't that awesome? Are you allowing yourself to do that? Or are you putting outside pressure on yourself to perform and do different things? And then let's take it a different direction. Are you putting undue pressure on somebody else to change? Now we're going to talk about the section called Inside Out. And Stephen Covey did some research, and he was looking at literature on personal growth type literature. And he realized that around World War II is when it changed. Before World War II, it focused on character building traits. After that, it was more, this is what the behavior you need to have, or this is how you need to act, and that type thing. He called them character ethics versus personality ethics. Now, I'm not crazy about those terms. You may like them, and if you do, go with it. But in a nutshell, character is who I am. Personality is what I do or how I behave. So figure out what makes sense to you there. So character is the very core of who you are. It's inside, it's internal. And the more we can develop that, the stronger we're going to be, and the more long-term changes will happen. Where the personality ethics, focusing on behavior and trying, especially to either change your behavior or somebody else's, focuses on outside. One's going inside, out. The other is out, trying to go inside. Long-term change happens from inside out. The second one, the personality or how you behave, it focuses on quick fixes. It focuses on techniques, trying to get people to change their behavior without changing what they believe. But in that process, it often allows the chronic problem to remain and to fester. It's under the rug, so to speak. And so long-term change is not going to be there. You might see some short-term change, but not long-term change. The character ethics, the one about who I am, focuses on principles. And we'll get more into principles later in the book, because this whole book is based on Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective Principles. Or I should say those 7 things are what he calls principles. They're true no matter what, whether you believe them or not, they're true. The personality ethics, it focuses on public image or what will other people think. If you had a parent or a mom that would say, well, what will the neighbors think if they see you doing this? That's very basic. But how many times do we feel that in our personal lives? What will our family think? If I say I'm not coming to this event, or in professional, what will my coworkers think? What will my supervisor think? So that's where that behavior comes in versus that core of who you are. And yes, some parts of the personality ethics, the one that does work on techniques, are good. Sometimes you need to learn those skills, such as customer service skills, communication skills, and all kinds of different skills. Those are just 2 that are very basic, but those need to be secondary, not primary. For the best change, you primarily work on the character and then add these other skills in on top of them as needed. I thought this was interesting. And I love how Stephen Covey, like I said, uses good examples and shows us what it's like. But he says, when you're focusing on techniques or that outside in, the behavior one, it's like cramming your way through school. For real success, there must be a process. Just like the farmer, if he wants to get a crop, has a process: tilling the ground, planting the seed, watering, that time process with the plants, and then the harvest. You always reap what you sow. There is no shortcut. You always reap what you sow. There is no shortcut. Now we're going to switch gears, and we're going to talk about paradigm and paradigm shifts. A paradigm is the way we see the world. Not actually our eyes, a visual sight, but in terms of perceiving, understanding, and interpreting. If we have the wrong paradigm, and you don't have to use that word, if that's too big a word, or if that's a word that doesn't make sense to you, it's how you see something. But it's also even deeper than that. It's what you think, what you believe. But let's think about it this way. It's how I see a situation, how I see a relationship. But if we have that wrong picture, that wrong paradigm, then by trying harder, we can get to the wrong place faster. But we're still in the wrong place. And Stephen Covey mentioned the part about the map of Detroit, having the map of Detroit and thinking it was Chicago. As long as he looked at that picture, he wasn't ever going to get to Chicago, was he? The problem is not with your behavior or your attitude. It is the wrong paradigm or map. We divide all our maps in our heads into two categories. One, the way things are realities, and two, the way things should be, which is our values. Maps are placed in each category by our interpretation. And guess what? Somebody else may have a different interpretation than what you do. 99% of the time, we do not question their accuracy. We assume that the way we see things is the way they really are or the way they should be. We just know we're right. Our attitudes and behaviors grow out of these assumptions. They are the source of the way we think and act. And let's take that just a step deeper and say they're the source of our beliefs, because our beliefs affect how we think and act. If you've read the book, then you remember the picture that he showed or the story, but he also had the picture in the book where some people would see the old woman and some people saw the young woman. And it was really hard once you saw one or the other to change and see the other. It was possible, but it was difficult. And let's take that out a little further into our world. If I have a paradigm of a certain situation, I may be seeing the old woman, quote and unquote. My husband has a different paradigm of the same situation. He may be seeing the young woman, quote, quote. It's going to help us communicate and work together if we can see the other's paradigm, because then we can work for that win-win. There'll be a lot more in that later. Conditioning powerfully affects our perceptions and our paradigms. We get input from all kinds of sources, from our family, especially our family of origin, those that raised us, school, church, work environment, friends, social media, the list can go on and on. And this is why it's a good idea to continually evaluate where you're getting your paradigms or how you see things. what you believe, and then be able to step back and say, where did that belief come from? And do I still want to believe that? Be open to change. Our paradigms, correct or incorrect, are the sources of our attitudes and behaviors, and ultimately our relationships with others. And the more we can know our paradigm and be able to see the other person's paradigm, the better off our relationship's going to be. This is an interesting statement. We cannot maintain wholeness if we talk and walk differently than what we see. So if I try to behave in a way that doesn't meet my internal paradigm of the situation, it's going to mess with me. To try to change outward attitudes and behaviors does very little good in the long run if we fail to examine the basic paradigm from which those attitudes and behaviors flow. We like to think we're objective. However, we see the world not as it is, but as we are conditioned to see it. When we describe what we see, we essentially are describing ourselves, our perceptions, and our paradigms. This next bullet point I actually bolded and put in blue. We've kind of mentioned to it before, but it's very good. The more we are aware of our paradigms and how we have been influenced by our experiences and outside sources, the more we can take responsibility for those paradigms and modify those that need to be. We've got a few more here on paradigms before we quit, because this is a big part of this, knowing how to work with the principles in this book. A paradigm shift is a change in our paradigm. Thomas Kuhn, in his book, talked a lot about how a lot of scientific discoveries through the years have been made because someone was willing to look at how it had been perceived in the past and make a break from it, a paradigm shift. Not all paradigm shifts are positive. Some are negative. And if you've read the book, then one of the stories that you probably remember is about the subway ride that Sunday morning. And this dad with some young kids got on the bus, on the subway. The dad actually sat by Stephen Covey. And the kids were rambunctious, causing a lot of noise. And all the passengers were thinking, oh, won't you do something, Dad? And finally, Stephen Covey said something to the dad. The dad was just sitting there with his head bowed. And he looked up, the dad did. And he says, yeah, this is my paraphrase of it. I guess they are. We just left the hospital and their mom just died. I don't think they know how to act right now. And that changed the paradigm for Stephen Covey. Instead of being put out with his dad, he wanted to know what he could do to help because it changed how he saw the situation. I apologize for the tears that were on your eyes because that story always hits me really hard right there. We talked about this one before, but it's a good one, so I'm going to say it again. We can make minor changes in our lives by focusing on our attitudes and behaviors. For significant changes, we must focus on our basic paradigms. It's that inside out. Paradigm shifts can be instantaneous. It was for Stephen Covey on the subway. However, most of them involve a process. The process with Stephen and his son, Sandra, with their son, was a process. It was over months and even years. Paradigms are inseparable from character. Being is seeing in the human dimension. For example, to relate effectively with any relationship, you must learn to listen. This is an example, this listening. We'll talk more about listening later. Listening requires emotional strength. Listening involves patience, openness, and the desire to understand. Highly developed qualities of character, that inside out, that character development. You have to be open to a new paradigm. It's easier to operate from a low emotional level and give high level advice. And this is our last bullet point on paradigms. The way we see the problem is the problem. You've got to ask yourself, could there be something I need to see in a deeper, more fundamental way? Some paradigm within myself that affects the way I see my time, my life, and my character. I want to end with a story that really hit me. Oh, before I do that, let me make this comment. There were two things this go around that really hit me that I don't remember really noticing before. And one was that difference between the character ethics and the personality ethics. I probably recognized the inside out a little bit 20 some years ago, but not as much as I did this time. And that's a key deal. And then the other one was the story here that I'm going to share with you. And I'll talk a little bit more after I share the story. But he tells the story of his 3-year-old daughter who refused to share her new toys with the other people at her birthday party. He ended up forcing her to share. He tried all kinds of techniques before that, which he knew wasn't the way to go. He was in a learning process himself. But he ended up forcing her and just taking the toys and said, here, play with these. And this is what he said afterward when he reflected. And he saw ways he could have handled it much better. Perhaps my daughter needed the experience of possessing the things before she could give it or share them. In fact, unless I possess something, can I ever really give it? She needed me as her father to have a higher level of emotional maturity to give her that experience. Had I been more mature, I could have relied on my own intrinsic strength, my understanding of sharing and of growth, and my capacity to love and nurture, and allowed my daughter to make a free choice as to whether she wanted to share or not share. Perhaps after attempting to reason with her, I could have turned the attention of the children to an interesting game, taking all the emotional pressure off my child. I have learned that once children gain a sense of real possession, they share very naturally, freely, and spontaneously. Perhaps a sense of possessing needs to come before a sense of genuine sharing. That's the end of that story, but then he goes on to bring it out more than that. Many people who give mechanically or refuse to give and share in their marriages and families may never have experienced what it means to possess themselves, their own sense of identity and self-worth. Really helping our children grow may involve being patient enough to allow them the sense of possession, as well as being wise enough to teach them the value of giving and providing the example ourselves. I think there's many of us as adults that have been taught to always share, to always give, and that's what we're supposed to do. And it's selfish if you don't. So we've never had that possession of knowing who we are, that we're valuable, that it's okay to love yourself. We just finished Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And we talked a lot about that there. And so you've got to possess that. And then naturally and organically, that will overflow to others. It can be material things, but I think it's also traits such as love, peace, trust, forgiveness, you name it. You can make your own list of the characters that you're working on right now. But it's only after we possess it that we can generously and graciously give it. And with that, that's the end of session 1.